All right, that's 6 o'clock. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Waste Disposal Task and Finish Group. This meeting this evening will be live streamed to the public. A recording of the public part of the meeting will be available on the Council's website within 24 hours. Remote participants joining the meeting using Teams must turn their cameras on and use hands up icon to indicate a question or comment, and turn microphones on to speak and off when finished. There isn't anyone joining remotely, is there? I think Sue might. Oh, okay. In-person attendees, please remember to switch microphones on when speaking and speak directly into the microphone. Turn them off when finished. And would in-person attendees please switch off your mobile phones or place them on silent? And have we got any apologies for absence?
Apologies from Councillor Young.
Okay.
Dan Leebridge in chair.
Okay. Right, shall we move on to the minutes? So we have minutes from the 23rd of May. Has everyone had the opportunity to look at the minutes? Are there any
Happy to move, sign them.
Yeah? Okay, perfect. Okay. I'll do that at the end. Do we have any disclosures of interest? Perfect. So there is no urgent business, is there? No. Am I moving too quickly? Okay. So we don't have any references from committees.
None, Chair.
None. Perfect. So moving on to the reports, and it's over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, there's a couple of typos on page 12, 7.5 on the line where the council expanded the service to all 84,000 properties. We've just got some census data which seems to indicate 79,800 rather than 84. So I think that's very much early data, but it does make a bit of a difference. And then in part 8, the second line where it says the bill offers, it should offers just erroneous word. It should, the bill mentions that new birding. That just makes it a bit easier to read. So for the body of the report, members posed a number of questions at the last meeting. We went through each section and answered those. So the first question was about material export, and we've confirmed that no recycling is passed on to the company and or exported. Additional costs, the second point was a report on the ideas for additional costs on additional sorting. So in point 7, we went through some of the work we've done with RAP on food waste and other materials, and given some facts and figures in there about the trial and the estimated costs of that rolled out across the town, and that is part of the environment bill, yet to be confirmed, but it's potentially mandatory from 24-25. The third point was if we're going to expand our recycling, what is the realistic percentage of how much extra recycling? And again, from some composition work, we've laid out some of the figures where some of the additional recycling is, as well as confirming how much food waste or wasted food, as it's called now, was in the residual. And we note how much could be collected. A further query was on additional sorts of finance, and what we've pointed out there that we're in the LGA and various other bodies, as well as the the higher level bodies that Robin and Nicola and the other directors in, and it's a constant source of lobbying to government about additional funding for waste and resource services. And the hope is that the Environment Bill, with its comments about new burdens, will mean that effectively, if a new service has to be brought in, that it will be fully funded, but that is yet to be confirmed by the government, of course. Point 5 was about the UK Wynn's last presentation and on the emission trading scheme, and we've put an extensive note about the UK trading scheme and some of the professional organisations who've put that response into government. And at the moment, it is undecided whether energy from waste for household waste would be covered by it and what would actually be covered by it. But the figures indicated are at the upper end of any costs. But again, that would be a new burden to councils, and it could, which most councils have pointed out, have very unintended consequences if suddenly things like landfill were significantly cheaper. When a lot of councils have spent years trying to divert from landfill, it could suddenly be cheaper. And then the final bit was about the question about other topics on the extended producer responsibility on the committee on climate change were two of the points that we discussed, and the current report has a large section on the government's proposals for the extended producer responsibility, which covers a huge range from the Tesco's to the Amazons to deposit return schemes, who pays, where the money goes, what materials would be covered by it. So it's quite an extensive report, and I'm sure members have read part of it or all of it. So here to answer any questions.
Councillor Franks.
Yeah, thanks very much. I've got a few questions. First of all, on the extended producer responsibility, two questions really. One is, any idea when we're likely to see that on the agenda? And the second question is, because I've read the government document that's produced here, and it doesn't actually say very much. So I guess the question is there enough information out there that we're actually going to learn very much, other than the nice words with no details or know how it's going to be made to work?
If I could come back, Chair, the information we've presented is literally all we have. Government are silent on when it will actually be implemented. They give some indicative dates of 2024, 2025. And the latest we're hearing is when Parliament rises, they may provide further details. But there's quite a few points in here which need probably a minimum of an 18-month lead-in, particularly things like the governance and the scheme administrator, for something which the government's own figures have projected will be an over £1 billion a year fund if all the people who produce packaging feed into it. So it's, as Councillor Frank says, it's heavy on words but light on promises. But it does give us an indication, really, if that's the way the government are thinking. There's a lot of lobbying going on, but it does also for things like the deposit return scheme confirm things like milk won't be part of it, and glass bottles, but that they will cover any plastic bottle, literally, with anything other than milk from 50 millilitres to 3 litres, which covers multi-packs and everything. So that's going to be quite a significant change for the public and the supermarkets, because this is all based on money paid up front. So the government will hold on to the packaging money, the deposit return money, and then it will be administered by a scheme administrator.
Yeah, I know they've already announced a 12-month delay, and no doubt more delays to come. Okay, moving on then. On the food waste experiment, could you tell us how that food waste was actually disposed of, please? I'd assumed it went in with the composting, but that may not be so.
No, it went to 2 anaerobic digestion facilities, one near Potter's Bar and one near Royston. We tried 2 facilities because we were anticipating if we had to roll it out, we need to know what the technologies are. So it's turned into a digestate and gas, and the digestate goes back onto the land, and the gas goes into gas engines or back into the grid. So that is the accepted technological way to deal with it. So it doesn't go back into the EFW or anything else. So it goes to a separate collection to a separate facility. And we're lucky, within 20 radial miles of here, there's about 6 facilities, which is pretty good. So in terms of what we would potentially will collect in the future.
So would be minimal methane producing?
They're closed facilities. They're big domes, big pressure vessels. So they siphon off the gas and they put that into the grid or into engines which generate electricity, and then that goes back into the grid. So it's a closed loop system.
Well, okay, so when you said gas, if it is in fact methane, yeah, I understand. Thank you. Further down page 12, the reference to greatest weights of residual waste in Biscot Wood. Hardly a surprise, really. There are a lot of large extended families, grandma and granddad, and all sorts of relatives all in one household. That inevitably they're going to produce more waste than your husband and wife and 2.3 kids. But the other point made there is thoughts about extending the recycling scheme. It's Luton's record of recycling domestic waste is the percentage is lower than in many neighbouring authorities. I'm just wondering whether we ought, as a group, to be scratching our heads to see if we can devise ways to make it easier for people to recycle without heaping masses of cost on additional sorting and that sort of stuff. But in the end, I work on the theory that if you want people to behave in a particular way, the easier you make it for them to do it, the more likely they will. So I guess here I'm just asking if officers and members of this group can get their heads buzzing a little bit on possible ways in which we could in fact make it easier for people to recycle, to encourage them to do so.
Yes, on that, we're constantly working with groups like the Keep Britain Tidy and RAP on ways to address the urban environment, which is essentially large parts of Luton. And going back to the census data, that seems to indicate a population of low 230,000, which means we're pushing on average over 3 people per household, which is firmly into the London borough, the inner London borough areas, and with the density of population per hectare, yeah, we're very firmly in that camp. As far as the easiest way, that's why we've kept very much a commingled service. We've got the separate glass, just to try and make it as easy for residents, and use the pictographics and the infographics, so to try and get over any language or other barriers, because we have quite a large turnover in some areas, as you're well aware of, housing and population. So part of the reason to give you the full range for the EPRs in there's a lot of sort of words from the government about mandating to a local level what you should collect and what you shouldn't collect, and some of the responses to the government of saying, you know, you have to let sometimes a bit of local knowledge and a bit of local application to get the best service for residents. It's not one size fits all for, you know, Cheshire to, you know, inner Manchester or whatever, and you can't mandate that really. So LGA and others are very keen pushing back to say there has to be some flexibility. You can't mandate that you must collect X, Y, and Z. In Luton, we collect probably 90% of the key materials. There's always things like yogurt pots and plastic film, which is very difficult to find markets for. But quite often it's the plastic bottles and things like that which are the highest percentage. So we've got the composition report being finalised, and we'll circulate that as soon as we've got that to members, so they can just see what was in the waste, because it's a messy business. But we've done two-week sessions now, so we've got a fair idea what's in Luton's waste.
No, thank you for that. There is. I guess it is rapidly developing a hobby horse within my brain, because there is another issue, which is as there is this rush to build more homes in the town, more and more and more of them are being occupied by people moving from London and St Albans and other places that are more expensive. They're doing nothing to contribute to Luton's housing problem, and the associated problem that comes with that is these families take a while to settle in. They don't immediately feel part of the Luton community, and their inclination to get involved in things like recycling takes some time to develop. So yeah, I'm not a subject, I guess, for this group, but I'm looking for an opportunity to get Scrutiny at some stage to have a look at that as an issue, on the basis that we should be trying to find a way to make sure that new homes that are built in the town are, at least in the first instance, occupied by local people. And I'm not asking Nicola to answer that one now, but it's something I think the Scrutiny needs to look at in the future.
I think on that particular issue, in terms of where they're looking at it, aren't they, in Cornwall and other areas around, outsiders coming in to buy second homes, and what the local authority is doing around securing some of that for local people. So I think there is a debate to be had, but it's a very much political debate, isn't it? I think in the first instance, and what within a local authority you can do, you can nudge and promote, but can we do anything in relation to Foxhall Homes, for example? Can we do anything in relation to certainly bits in relation to planning of new homes? I think there's probably some things we can do, but I think as an overall kind of policy framework, we would probably want to have that political debate around that going forward, and see how that links to the local plan. We've got local plan working party coming up anyway shortly, haven't we? So it might be something that we can start to look at there. But I think it's a really interesting national debate that's going to develop over time.
Yes, it absolutely is. I mean, we live in a close with only 33 houses in it. We've been there for 8 years. 5 houses have changed hands in that period. Not one of them is now occupied by people who moved from elsewhere in Luton. None of them.
Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Chair. I think this point's been made before, but I think I'll reiterate it. A lot of the housing in Luton is old stock, got quite a narrow frontage. Therefore, the amount of bins you can have outside them is limited. And a lot of the new stuff which is being built is 3 stories high and again, narrow frontage. So the number of bins that you can stack outside each house is limited. So trying to sort the problem out with the householder putting different items in different bins is going to be difficult in Luton, to say the least. Therefore, we should be looking at where we sort it at Kingsway, that we should have the equipment there which will do the doing for us rather than relying upon the residents.
Just in response to that, Councillor, that's why we offer a commingled collection and we do the sorting at Kingsway and then the reprocessors. The only thing we ask residents to keep out of the recycling bin is glass, which is a separate collection. 2 reasons. One, it's very heavy. And the other is if it goes in the back of a dust cart or any machine, it tends to break. So and the shards get into the plastics and the paper and then render that effectively unrecyclable. It gets rejected further down the line. So glass is the key thing, and it's one we fought hard to sort of keep the service going and keep it separate. It's not something you really want to mix with the recycling, which the paper, the card, the plastics. So that's the key thing. Unless mandated to and forced to by the government, the intention is still to have a commingled service, which is basically everything goes into either the clear recycling sack and or the green lidded bin, and then that goes on for processing, because you get a better material when you've got that volume going through a MRF. It's lovely to have loads of separate bins, but no urban street in the country has the sort of space you need. You could have up to 7-8 containers if you went down that route. So it's not something I think we're contemplating in any shape or form.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of bits first. Let me just go back to page 12, where we were talking before, up around the bottom end of the section 7. It does seem to me there were some parts of this report concern me. I share what was said, which is that some of the government things, they're words, but frankly, they don't mean a fat lot at the moment, I'm afraid. If I go back, though, to the food one for a minute, and maybe Councillor Franks would be able to tell me how well or badly it did work, because it wasn't in my patch. But it seems to me that central government, by what it said in the Environment Bill, is actually going out of its way to make sure that actually we would be stupid to make any decision to do anything about the food waste, because if we wait, we might get some of the upfront costs associated with doing it. But if we do anything now, we won't. So it seems to me the government is doing us a disservice as an local authority, and I think that's very worrying. My second point, and I'd like your comments on that in a moment, but my second one, let's deal with that as well. I'm very conscious of the fact, because I've been today dealing with some things, and some good things, I'm glad to say, in Kimpton Road with the war memorials and things, and that was great, but it brought me to mind the new flats and so on. How confident are we that the new flats are in any way properly addressing recycling and things? Because my personal experience has been that flats and recycling and so on don't seem to mix.
If I come back on the trial, it was reasonably successful. We put a lot of time and resources into it, but in a similar manner to a lot of food waste schemes, the participation drops off after a time as people, one, realise how much wasted food they have, and two, not everything can go in. So classically, bones can't go in. So if you eat a lot of meat with bones, you can't put that in. So not every bit of wasted food can go in there. It's got the processes, the digestive processes are quite selective. So it was reasonably well participated, and the work we did with RAP and others, sort of indicated what sort of yields we would get. As far as your comments about the government and its the unintended consequence of their proposals, I would tend to agree. If we were bringing in food waste across the town, we've given you some indicative costs. If the government was going to pay for that as a new burden, if it was brought in under their instructions, we'd be foolish not to wait.
If I can just chip in, what brought this more to mind was when I went back and reread some of these papers before tonight's meeting. Gove had been spouting off again and was talking about trying to make funding awards to local authorities for a 2-year period the next time round. If that's the case, then if we go forward to his next funding round, then that's going to cover the period that where it says it's mandatory for 2024-5. We're almost getting to the point where on his next round of local government funding, we ought to be able to see whether or not what they've said is going to be realistic or whether it's complete and utter rubbish as usual.
I would agree. To just give you an idea, with the way the production works now, if they don't say something and confirm this year, all councils will miss the delivery cycles for food waste vehicles because it's a 2-year order. So they have to give us a two-year lead-in to any decision they make just to get the vehicles. And that's what we've been feeding back, as I say, through the LGA, Adept, Solace, any council, and this is counties as well as unitaries. They've got to give us a long lead-in time. With regard to flats, yes, it's a particular challenge, and we had a scheme 3 or 4 years ago where it was on the basis of trying to convince people what you carry up to your flat in the terms of food shopping and packaging. If you have a think about that, you then won't generate so much waste, because effectively it has to come back down, especially in new blocks where there's no longer waste chutes or whatever, and there's usually just 2 bins, 1 recycling and 1 waste for, say, 10 flats. So it's a constant battle for good landlords as well as council tenants, and as well, for the crews and the other teams, because you just need one person to disregard in a block of 10 for it all to go to pot, unfortunately. So.
I'd like to pick up what Councillor Mead said. All this thing about multiple bins, have we actually thought through different options? For example, you can get a typical householdy sized bin. I could instantly, if you think about it, you could think about maybe splitting that into 2 or 3 sections with opening fronts where they're different types of thing. I don't recall having seen bins like that about, but it doesn't seem to me it would be that hard to do a design like that.
No, it's some authorities who collect from multiple bins do provide a version like that, but the knock-on effect is that your collection vehicle then has to have that separate compartments. Works reasonably well in some small villages and, dare I say, nice towns, but when you got quite an urban environment where you're taking 2 or 3 times the time to empty one person's bin on a busy street, it often leads to quite a lot of challenges. And when you take it back, the material you then have to tip separately, so it increases the whole resources you need for not much gain in terms of material quality or quantity. So we'll wait to see. As I say, the EPR indicates the government might mandate that, but that could be 25, 26, 27. So there's a lot of back and forward with the government at the moment about making sure that whatever's provided in Luton, Central Beds, Milton Keynes is suitable for that area. It's not just a blanket, one size fits all, and that's the key thing. The residents of the town, the members of the town council all have to buy into that and deliver it to make it successful. That's it.
Have we got any more questions on the report that Sean's produced? No? Right, should we go back to the subject areas for the next few meetings, which I believe is at the end of the minutes. The second recommendation for this evening's meeting is to confirm the subject areas suggested and indicate whether there are any other areas of interest. The subject areas are at item 17 of the minutes. We are on page number 9, bottom of page number 9. I think that's, I don't know if they're elsewhere in the papers, but there are some points there.
There's only one thing that keeps bothering me, and that is we clearly want to minimise landfill for all sorts of reasons. Cost, yes, but other reasons as well. The methane and other waste that it produces. But some of us have got quite serious reservations about increasing use of the obvious alternative, which is incineration. So I'm just wondering whether the experts, the people who actually do know about waste disposal and how other authorities do it, whether there are any ideas out there about how you can minimise landfill without increasing incineration. I don't know. I don't know the answers, but I'd love to ask the question.
If I could come back, Councillor, one of the key, with all the government consultations, the one that got the lowest coverage was on waste prevention. Even though the industry really pushed it, it almost slipped by the wayside, and the government sort of set some long targets, but the points raised by the professionals about waste prevention was the only true way to save carbon, money, especially in times of spiralling prices. So we wait to hear what the government's thoughts on that. In terms of alternative technologies, there are a few out there. There are ones which Cambridge have got one, which is based on like almost composting the residual waste. It's called MBT, mechanical biological treatment. It's very successful in Italy, where the climate suits it. Here, there's one in London and one in Cambridge, and they both have ongoing problems, I think is the best way. And there are a couple of other technologies around gasifying the waste at a high temperature, far higher than the EFW you saw, so that you basically get no byproducts. There's one of those in existence, I think, in the UK, in Cheshire. So they're very much, people are looking at the technology. Many years ago, we looked at what to do with nappy waste. We got through some advanced talks with a company, and that in the end they folded just because they couldn't make it economic. But there's always technological providers out there who are seeking to provide an option, and it's something we could, when we go out to the market, hopefully we will get at least one person who will put some alternative technology in, and we can ask that question as an option in B, say. But at the moment, the EFWs are the predominant non-landfill technology.
Over the years on television science programs, they've gone about digesting waste and all sorts of things with microbes. Is that research still going on? Does it look like it'll ever result in a doable solution, or is it still very much science fiction?
As far as I'm aware, there is one facility in Cheshire. I'm not too sure how effective it is. I can inquire and see, send a note round to members, but that's the only one I know in the UK. I think there's also one in Denmark. Yes.
Just one more question, please, Joe. Is there any way, to me, one of the keys, we go back to what you say was mostly overlooked, which is how to stop the issues with waste in the first place. And one of the keys, we still keep going back to it, to all the unnecessary packaging and so on that we get, which is very typical. Have we got any way as a council of incentivising supermarkets operating in our borough for selling product with less packaging? So have we got any way we can give a financial incentive to some of them? I mean, we know that, for example, at least according to their publicity statements, we've had some publicity stuff from Morrison's in particular, who've said that they're going towards less packaging and seem to be making a reasonable effort to do it, though the Morrison's in Leighton Buzzard didn't really give me the feeling that they were doing that much. I'd like to see an incentive, and I know it means that we've got to get people back to being educated to try and think local produce, think seasons again, really. And that's a huge education task we've got to do. So I'd like to see more emphasis on us as a council doing more education, really pushing it down people's throats. And I'd like to see us give a financial incentive to supermarkets and shops to sell stuff with less packaging. I don't know if we can do that.
If you look at the page 23, which is the executive summary of the EPR, that is effectively the goal of the EPR, to make sure that that packaging is fully funded to be recycled, and by default, that what will happen is suddenly, if there's a cost of £100, say, per tonne, people will come up with solutions for £90, which are better designed, better, more recyclable, less packaging, because this is all up front. So the producers don't want to give that money to the government and never get it back. And as far as residents go, that is waste prevention is the key, whether it's packaging, whether it's getting things online, and buying local is far superior, because that sort of fits in with everything to get the town better, to try and cut down on the amount of food miles or packaging miles. You know, we see the lorries go up and down the M1. In terms of the town itself and incentivizing, we're having some discussions with our public health team about how we link in the food plan for the town to the amount of wasted food. Now, whether that's sort of slightly old-fashioned, showing people how to cook, buying a chicken rather than chicken breasts, and that sort of thing, and what you can make. We have quite a large and ongoing campaign on Facebook for Love Food, Hate Waste. But, you know, just dealing with wasted food would see such a reduction in the amount of waste in the bin, which would benefit the residents and the council. But more importantly, with the work we would hope and to do with people like RAB, Keep Britain Tidy, and public health, it would see more money in people's pockets, because they're still throwing away an awful lot of food waste, which they've already bought. And, you know, the data for the UK is roughly £70 per month per household, which, if there's 79,000 households in Luton, that's an awful lot of money each month, which is just transitioning through the house into the bin at a time when prices are going up and there's some poverty in certain areas. So that's why the councils and waste professionals keep pushing the government about prevention, not just collecting food waste. You've got to prevent wasted food.
I suppose I'm just a little bit sort of thinking that we're being a bit wishy-washy about some of this stuff. If I just give you an example, I happen to have a close relative who I have to go and see quite frequently up in Birmingham. In one of the little towns which are around the periphery of Birmingham, the town authority there have deliberately allowed people selling fresh food in a market environment twice a week to sell fresh vegetables to get their pitch in the market at hugely discounted rates, provided they stick to sets of guidelines. And for example, some of the best quality vegetables I've bought for years was from that market, from groups of market stallholders selling, instead of a plastic bag full of Jersey potatoes, which are presumably, if they're telling the truth on the packet, have been airlifted in from Jersey, put into plastic bags. They don't keep well anyway. And then you've got a plastic bag to worry about, instead of putting them from a bulk, non-plastic sack of Jersey potatoes into a brown paper bag, which goes into my basket and comes home. They're both better potatoes and hugely less waste. But the key to them doing that in that town was the fact that if the storeholder stuck to the rules, they got a much cheaper store. This is where I suppose my thinking about, can't we do things to be a bit more inventive, a bit more adventurous in terms of how we incentivize people? And to be honest, you can do more to incentivize the merchant than you can do to incentivize the householder. And my worry, going back again to my food processing, my food waste thing that I asked in the first place, is the difficulty for a lot of householders is that a lot of the waste food, maybe it's just me because I these days unfortunately live on my own. So my biggest issue with waste food is not waste that is there because it's what's left over after I've cooked and eaten. It's the stuff that's in the fridge that I haven't got round to using yet, which is still therefore in packaging. And even if you give me a waste food bin, I've then got to take the damn stuff out of the packaging to be able to put it in there. So going back full circle, and stop wittering on, David, the key thing, I think, is trying to find a way to actually incentivize not just the householder, but people like the traders. And I do think that example I gave you from up near Birmingham is a good one.
Sean, do you want to respond to that at all?
I think we should. I mean, I think the concept of incentivising public, particularly if we want to shift behaviour change, is a good one. I think the thing that we've got to come up with is kind of what that incentive is, and it will be different things for different people and different. And we've got to innovate around that. And I haven't got the answer, but I think the concept. I mean, we've got a conundrum, haven't we, where I think we want people ultimately to produce less waste. We want to prevent waste in the first place. I want people to consume less of so that they're kind of wasting less. But when we've got to then recycle, we need to come up with an innovative way that we haven't come up with before to kind of see if we can incentivize certain groups. And I know Sean does a lot of work, and Steve does, with schools and how we are incentivizing schools and young people to work with their parents to kind of do things differently. But I think we've kind of got to draw that out much more into the public domain. I think there is so much that we are doing, but we're not talking about it. And I think a big thing in terms of changing the culture of the town and how we move towards our net zero credentials as well is a completely different mindset in how we consume, how we recycle, and how we operate in that space. And you're right, it's a massive education piece, and the team have been working on that for a long time. And there's good practice. We can talk. Be good to talk about some good practice as well, but how do you build on that? So you've got mass participation, not just small groups of kids or their parents, but mass participation and mindset shift. And I think we do need to think about that more. I haven't got the answer, and I think there's probably lots of good practice across Europe. But it's not mainstream yet, and I think we've really got to kind of work hard about Luton's environment being a very densely populated urban area. People live very differently. We've got significant poverty levels. How do we use those numbers and that understand Luton to kind of put a very nuanced incentivization in place around recycling? And I think that's a conundrum and something we've got to work on together, officers and members. I think it is. Could we crack it? Yes, we could, but it's a long-term piece of work. It really is.
I understand what you're saying, Nicola, and I agree with you. It is a difficult thing to do. I'm not denying the fact that there's a lot of very good work going on in Luton, and I'm the first one to keep shouting up and saying that actually we don't tell people anywhere near loudly enough what stuff we're doing right, because we sit here with a bad reputation, quite often undeserved. But if you look at things like the food waste that I deliberately chose to use only because it happened to be last weekend that I was involved in doing it. If you can show people that they can actually get, if you show the public they can actually get better quality with less packaging, and you show the traders they can trade more cheaply if they stick to the rules, then we start to get a degree of synergy. But yes, of course, we need to carry on the education. It has to be a lot more overt than it is.
It's worth mentioning we've got an ongoing competition at the moment, but easygoing green, which is linked in with carbon, and it closes tomorrow, and so not to prejudge, but one of the a family who sent in a video, and they went through everything from turning off taps, their 2 children, teaching each other about recycling, to drying clothes on the line, home composting, and really good for them, having their first attempt at growing some herbs and potatoes in the garden. And we're not prejudging, but it's a very good thing. And whatever happens, if they don't win the main prize, we'll be speaking to them again, because that's the type of people and that's the type of example we want to use across the town, because they can reach people that council and council officers don't often reach. If they extend that to their families, to their group, to their school, and that's the way to get things to grow organically, because you're right, you want that behavior change to stick. One of the things, it's a bit academic research, but they showed during lockdown, because people walked for more than 100 days, it became a normal behavior. And that's the sort of thing, if you recycle regularly, it becomes the norm. Same with food, shopping, learning to cook, all the things we're sort of trying to speak to public health about, and they're very keen to go. And it's across the board things like social prescribing, walking to the doctors or walking to the hospital rather than driving. It's all part of that whole thing, that all essentially leads back to that 2040 vision in one element or another about Luton as a town being fair, net zero, but also a good town to live and work and live in. Yeah.
Councillor Franks.
Yeah, I just want to take up this supermarket issue that David Wynn raised. It seems to me that if you want manufacturers to produce less waste and less packaging, then the pressure needs to come from their customers, which in the case of food and ancillary stuff is the supermarkets. Now, knowing what a bolshy so-and-so I can be sometimes, it will surprise none of you to learn that a few years ago I was involved with a group in Luton who were deliberately leaving unnecessary packaging at supermarket checkouts. And yes, that does mean take your toothpaste tube out of the box and leave the box. It does mean taking your multi-pack wrapping off and leaving it at the checkout. And it's amazing how much unnecessary packaging one family's weekly shop can leave at the checkout. Sadly, it was discontinued because there weren't enough people involved to have a significant impact on the big supermarkets. But there might be, if an organisation like Luton Council were to encourage such practices and encourage people to leave unnecessary packaging at the checkout at Sainsbury's and Tesco and what have you. The amounts involved are considerable, I can assure you, from my personal experience. And yeah, if Luton Council wants to get involved in encouraging people to do that, then I'm quite happy to talk to them and take part.
Just to quickly add to that, we're led to believe, and we've got some slides we're just going through, that one of the consequences of the government, albeit vague timescales of the EPR, is that a lot of the larger supermarkets are thinking exactly along those lines, because they want that packaging to come back to them so they can claim back from this system. So they're thinking about having in-store packaging systems where you can do very much as you said. You buy the goods, you can either take it home and bring it back to them, or you can dismantle at the end of the line and put it in the same baskets that they brought the materials in, because essentially for them, they brought a full lorry with all the goods. It's an empty lorry going back. So it's some of the logistics that works at airports, you know, so that you never got an empty lorry leaving an airport. It's always taking something away. So.
Great. Do we have any more comments on the future agenda items? No? Okay. I just had one, which was referring back to our conversation earlier, Sean, about the item we haven't covered yet, which was Councillor Shaw's initial comments around the scope of bringing the service in-house and how you're going to bring that back at a future meeting. Yeah.
Can I just come in? So I think there's a lot of work happening at the moment in readiness for the time frame that we're working to. So our current contract, as members know, with the current provider FCC comes to an end in March 2024. So hence why this work with the Task and Finish group is so valuable. And we're looking currently at the options appraisal for different models of delivery, because I think there are numbers out there. So we're just working those up, and I think it'd be useful for members to see the range.
So I think we have covered both the recommendations. The recommendation was that we review the responses and confirm the subject area suggested. So I think that brings us to the close, doesn't it? Okay. Well, thank you all very much for coming and participating in tonight's meeting. And the date of the next meeting is, I don't have it written down. 28th of July. The next meeting's on the 28th